So you know what, today I really fancy yanking something out of a box and then banging on about it for just under 15 minutes because I don't do that very often at all. And hey look, it's the Honor X9, a fresh new budget-friendly blower from our great mates Honor. Should be launching here in the UK and across Europe very soon indeed. And this thing comes packing a whopper of a 6.8-inch 120Hz display. You got the Snapdragon 695 chipset in there, so hopefully it should be awesome for gaming. Going to give that a full testing. Got full 5G support. You've got a 4,800 milliamp battery with 66 watt fast charging. So overall, pretty respectable specs for a budget smartphone. But let's take a full-on tour of the Honor X9. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! The first order of business is, as always, what do you get in the box? Well, you've got one suitably shiny Honor X9. You got yourself a 66 watt Honor supercharge adapter. Bit of a beast, although I have seen bigger. FNAF. You got one Type-C USB cable. And Honor has rather kindly bundled in a condom case as well to keep your phone safe from home, although there is an almighty hole cut out of the middle of this thing to make room for that rather sizable camera bump. And that is it. Everything that you get chucked in here, nice and straightforward. So here, clutched to my claw, is the fresh new Honor X9. And first up, I've got to say, I'm liking that design. It actually reminds me of the Honor Magic 4 flagship smartphone, which only just launched. And that's not just down to the fact you've got that enormous circular camera bump on the back, which is almost identical, the Eye of Osiris or whatever random name they decided to give it. But overall, it looks and feels more premium than I actually expected. Starting with that display, perfectly flat screen with quite skinny bezels surrounding it, as you can see there. Slightly chunky chin, but nothing too dramatic. Definitely not talking a full-on Jimmy Hill or anything. Honor's official specs didn't mention anything about Gorilla Glass, unfortunately, up front, but you do get a pre-installed screen protector, at least, to help stave off scuffs and scratches. The phone definitely has a decent heft to it at 189 grams, and not too thick, as you can see there. It is, of course, a 6.81-inch beast, so one-handed use is going to be a little bit tricky. Thankfully, there is a dedicated one-handed mode on this thing. Got your edge-mounted fingerprint sensor built into that power button, volume rocker, Type-C USB down below. No headphone jack, unfortunately. And then if we flip around to the back end, it is just your basic plastic finish, but it's got a lovely matte design, so hopefully touchwood shouldn't prove too much of a magnet for greasy fingerprints and other horrible, nasty grime. This here is the titanium silver model, but you can also grab it in midnight black or ocean blue. Fairly clean design overall, only a tiny bit of branding down below, so nothing too horrendous. And yes, that camera bump is a sight to behold. Holy bejesus. Thankfully, as you can see there, it doesn't jut too far from the arse end of the smartphone, so it shouldn't prove too troublesome. So let's check out the software here on the Honor X9, and unfortunately, it is running the older Android 11, not the latest 12. And squatting on top of that is Honor's very own MagicUI version 4.2. Not sure exactly when it's going to get that upgrade to Android version 12, but hopefully should be coming soon. Thankfully, at least MagicUI isn't a really heavy overlay. You do get a reasonably stock version of Android here. So you've got the Discover feed if you flick that way. You've got your apps tray to store everything away. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be a way of dragging down the notifications bar just by swiping anywhere on the screen, which is a problem further compounded by the fact that the Honor X9 is a 6.8-inch beast. Quite a meager selection of home screen settings there, as you can see. But if you jump on into the rest of the smartphone settings, you do get a fair amount of customization that you can perform here, including changing up the themes, the wallpaper, the icon design. But because you're not running Android 12 on this thing, you can't change up, for instance, the colors of the UI based on what wallpaper you currently have slapped on there. But yeah, Honor really hasn't messed around too much at all with the settings menu here on Android. It is a very stock sort of vibe. If you jump into accessibility features, you do have the likes of the one-handed mode. You've got some other shortcuts and gestures. Why am I using this one-handed? And thankfully, there's very little in the way of crapware stuffed onto the Honor X9 as well. It's mostly just your standard Google stuff. You will find a few extras squirreled away on here, like Honor's own app markup. You do have full Play Store access. Thankfully, you've got this beta club shenanigans. A recorder tool, you've got the Honor Store and the Honor Club if you are really big on, full on into your Honor. And then as mentioned before, for all your security needs, you do have that edge-mounted fingerprint sensor, slightly indented, built into that power button there. So very easy to find when you're just groping around for it. And so far, no qualms with this whatsoever. As you can see, they're very speedy, very responsive, doesn't seem to have any issues authenticating. And this is also backed with some tasty face recognition as well, just in case you can't actually use the fingerprint sensor because you're wearing gloves or whatever else, as you can see there. Again, pretty swift and responsive. And on the storage front, you've got a choice of 128 or 256 gigs of space here on the Honor X9. And if you pull out the old SIM tray, you'll see that while it is a double-sided effort, so space for 2 SIMs, there is no room in there for a micro SD memory card. So if you do think you're going to be using up a lot of storage, shooting a lot of video, downloading a lot of apps and media, well, you might want to plump for that 256 model. Now, if you like them big, well, you'll certainly enjoy the Honor X9's mighty 6.81-inch LCD display. It's an absolute freaking whopper. You've got a full HD plus resolution on there, 2388 by 1080 pixel resolution. So even though it's quite spacious, reasonably crisp visuals, certainly absolutely fine for your Netflix and your YouTube and whatever. I say your Netflixing, but Netflix currently actually isn't supported on the Honor X9 as it is a pre-release device. Hopefully by the time it actually hits the UK, that'll be resolved. You've got Disney Plus, Prime Video, all that good stuff on here. Reasonably punchy for a basic LCD panel. You don't have the real punch of an OLED panel, of course. Although that display is set to vivid mode by default, you can play around with various other eye comfort modes. You've got an ebook mode as well, which just turns everything black and white, basically. Viewing angles aren't particularly great, so once you start to tilt the display away, you will notice a bit of a degradation in the picture quality. Everything sort of darkens. But on the top brightness, it seems absolutely fine for everyday use. Even when it's super bright outside, I didn't really struggle to see what was going on. And you've only got that dinky wee selfie cam sphincter intruding on proceedings when you do decide to go full screen for your Disney Plus or whatever. You do have a variable refresh rate as well here on the Honor X9. As you can see, they're set to dynamic by default. I can scale it from 60Hz up to 120Hz when you're using a supported app. Otherwise, you can just say F it and chuck it on 120Hz full time if you so desire. All right, let's merrily bounce our way onto the audio chops. And the Honor X9 does sport a simple mono speaker setup, just a bottom mounted speaker right here. It's a shame because some budget phones do come rocking a stereo speaker output now, but let's bump up the volume, see if it's any good. It is a completely flat display again here on the A53. And yeah, it's perfectly fine, pretty bog standard to be perfectly honest with you. Not particularly loud on the top volume, it should be absolutely fine as long as you're not in a crazy loud environment just for kicking back with a bit of YouTube shenanigans or what have you, but rather tinny as well. Which makes the fact that there's no headphone jack here on the Honor X9 all the more irksome, so it is Bluetooth all the way. Thankfully, I've had no issues so far, just in a preliminary 24 hours with the Honor X9. As far as the Bluetooth 5.1 streaming goes to speakers, headphones, and what have you, absolutely flawless, even at a decent range. And likewise, the performance has been absolutely fine on this shiny silver smartphone. You got the Snapdragon 695 crammed inside of there, same as the likes of the Poco X4 Pro. That's backed on this Poco blower by either 6 or 8 gigs of RAM. I've got the 8 gig model here, and as you can see, they're very similar benchmarking scores to that Poco X4 Pro, and also Samsung's Galaxy A53, which I just recently reviewed. However, I saw less judder and overall jank here on the Honor X9 compared with that Samsung blower. And also, while the Galaxy A53 really struggled with the likes of Genshin Impact, absolutely no issues here on the Honor X9. Yeah, there's the occasional little frame rate dip, but to be honest, it plays on those lower detail settings with a very fluid finish. More than playable, that's for sure. The screen response rate, 240Hz, perfectly reasonable again for an action-packed game like Genshin Impact. It should also be fine for your likes of your Call of Duties, your PubGs, all that good stuff. And you do have a dedicated Game Center app here on the Honor X9 as well, but sadly that wasn't working for me in this pre-release version. Again, that's something like Netflix that will hopefully be sorted when it comes to retail. And the Honor X9 also stays pleasingly cool during long gaming sessions as well, so no worries if you want to spend an entire afternoon smashing goblins in their grubby little faces. The X9 certainly won't get all toasty, you won't see that performance getting throttled. And that Snapdragon 695 also serves up a good bit of 5G support as well, so sorted for your connectivity. As for the battery life, well, the Honor X9 packs a 4,800 mAh capacity cell. So only a smidge under the 5,000 mAh efforts that you'll get packed into many rivals. But you know what absolutely does the job perfectly here, helped along by the fact that you've got that energy efficient Snapdragon 695 SoC. So far, just today alone, I've had the screen on for almost 2 hours. I've been making liberal use of that camera, shooting home movie footage, lots of photo samples, streaming Disney Plus, streaming YouTube, of course, just showing off the various features to you fine folk at home. And the battery is still at 85%. So most people should be able to get away with just charging this thing up once every couple of days or so. And when you do need to recharge the Honor X9, it's got full 66 wired charging support as well. So it powers up pretty damn nipply. I know there's no wireless charging support, but that's bloody difficult to find at this sort of budget price point. So let's finish up with a squint at that camera tech, and despite the fact that that camera bump is basically the size of Bulgaria, you do only get 3 lenses on there. So the main shooter uses a 48 megapixel primary sensor. You've got all of the usual bonus modes, including AI photography. This is kind of boost the colors a bit, though I prefer to leave it off for a more natural finish. You got various filters and the rest as well, but a fairly straightforward, streamlined interface, just tap and shoot. And here's just a few of the test pics I snapped around the homestead these past 24 hours. Reasonable results overall, a fair amount of detail packed into every snap as long as the lighting conditions are okay. Honor X9 doesn't seem too perturbed by HDR style situations. Does a good job when capturing living subjects as well. You got a nice bit of portrait mode action on there if you want it. Colors reasonably natural again as long as you leave that AI mode knocked off. In more ambient conditions, indoors for instance, yes, you still get some decent colour reproduction. However, pets, kids, other moving subjects will have to actually keep still, otherwise they'll just come out blurry. And at night time, you know what, again, the Honor X9 does alright for a budget blow. You'll get a reasonable amount of detail packed in there, not too much grain, and you do have a dedicated night mode if you want to brighten up a scene. One slight peculiarity with the Honor X9 is the fact you don't actually get an ultra-wide angle lens on here for a more pulled back view. The final 2 lenses are just your bog standard basic macro and depth sensors. Still, you got a few bonus modes you can play around with, including the likes of a high-res mode if you want to shoot at the maximum 48 megapixel resolution. Otherwise, the Honor X9 captures images at 12 megapixel using 4-in-1 pixel binning. And you've also got a pro mode on there as well if you want to mess around with the individual camera settings, ISO levels, white balances, shutter speeds. If it's video you're after, well, you do max out at full HD 1080p here on the Honor X9, sadly. There's no 4K option at all, and that is at 30 frames per second as well. There's no 60 FPS option. And as long as you've got enough light, this is absolutely fine for very simple home movie shenanigans, although the image stabilization is pretty balls, so you want to stay as still as possible while recording. And then around front, you've got a 16 megapixel selfie shooter as well if you want to get some basic shareable snaps for your Facebooks or whatever. Since we're looking less wrinkly and haggard compared with usual, that's because the beauty mode is active by default. So you want to knock that off if you want to actually look more like your actual self. You've got the usual portrait mode, smart as well for that selfie shooter. And again, seems absolutely fine as long as the lighting conditions aren't too troublesome. And if you want to be shooting video with that front-facing 16 meg selfie camera, you can once again shoot at full HD resolution at 30 frames per second, and it should be absolutely fine for your Skype and your Zoom and all that good stuff. So there you have it. That in a nutshell is the Honor X9, a fresh new budget-friendly blower. Should be hitting Europe and the UK imminently. And while it is lacking some features you'll find quite happily at this sort of budget price point, such as a headphone jack, stereo speaker setup, etc, etc, I'm overall quite impressed. I've got to say the performance is really slick. Even if you want to play a bit of Genshin Impact and some of those more demanding Android titles, the battery life is absolutely sublime. I just really hope it gets Android 12 soon and stays updated in the near future as well with the security updates and also those OS updates. So it'd be great to hear what you think down in the comments below. Please do poke, subscribe and ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech, and have yourselves a fantastic rest of the week. Cheers!